Hey guys, tonight we begin with a subject that most history books politely step around. A topic so ordinary, so unavoidable, and yet so strangely fascinating that generations of school children have somehow managed to graduate without anyone explaining it properly. So, dim the lights, get comfortable, and settle in. Maybe grab a blanket, because tonight we're slowly wandering through the stone corridors of medieval castles to answer a question that kings, queens, servants, soldiers, and extremely unfortunate visitors all had to deal with. How exactly did people go to the bathroom in medieval castles? As it turns out, the answer is considerably less glamorous than Hollywood might suggest, which is honestly impressive, considering medieval life already had a reputation for mud, questionable hygiene, and diseases with names that sound like rejected fantasy villains. Still, people remained people, and people, no matter how noble or how majestic their family tree happened to be, needed somewhere to sit and contemplate their life choices. Even kings, especially kings, because being God's chosen ruler of England apparently did not exempt anyone from digestive issues. Of course it didn't. Now, when most people picture castles, they imagine grand halls, banners waving in the breeze, armored knights clanking around dramatically, and perhaps a noblewoman staring sadly out of a window because her husband has once again gone off to fight somebody over a border dispute that everyone will forget about in 30 years. What they usually do not picture are toilets, which is understandable. Toilets don't often make it into fairy tales. Disney tends to leave that part out. But castles were cities in miniature. Hundreds of people sometimes lived inside them. Lords, ladies, guards, cooks, servants, scribes, priests, stable boys, visiting nobles, and that one cousin nobody particularly liked but who somehow stayed for 6 months. All of these people needed facilities, and so medieval architects, surprisingly enough, devoted considerable thought to the problem. Their solution was something known as the garderobe. Now, despite sounding like an expensive French clothing store, a garderobe was essentially a toilet, not a fancy one, not even close. Usually, it was a small chamber built into the castle wall. Inside sat a stone or wooden seat with a hole, and beneath that hole was, well, nothing, just open space. Gravity handled the rest, which admittedly sounds alarmingly casual by modern standards. The waste would simply fall down into a pit, a moat, or sometimes directly outside the castle walls, because medieval engineering often operated according to the principle of, that sounds like tomorrow's problem. And tomorrow's problem usually belonged to somebody lower on the social ladder, which was convenient, for the nobility at least. The design itself varied. Some garderobes projected outward from the castle walls. Others were hidden inside towers. Some discharged into cesspits that had to be cleaned periodically. And by periodically, we mean whenever the smell became impossible to ignore. Not exactly a precise scientific measurement, but standards were different back then. People expected certain odors. Cities smelled, animals smelled, armor smelled, and after wearing heavy wool clothing for several weeks, people themselves probably contributed to the atmosphere in ways modern noses would find deeply upsetting. Yet medieval people weren't ignorant. Contrary to popular belief, They actually understood that bad smells and filth were unpleasant and unhealthy. They simply lacked modern plumbing, which honestly does most of the heavy lifting in our civilization. Without plumbing, we're all just improvising. Now, kings enjoyed somewhat better arrangements, because naturally they did. Being king meant never having to share your toilet with 30 soldiers named William. Henry VIII, centuries later, employed servants whose entire careers revolved around assisting him with extremely private matters. These officials held titles that sound oddly prestigious considering their responsibilities. One famous position was Groom of the Stool. And yes, that title means exactly what you think it means. The Groom of the Stool was responsible for attending the king during bathroom visits, which raises many questions. Most notably, how desperate was the job market? Yet surprisingly, this was considered an honorable position, because proximity to the king meant influence. Political decisions could emerge from conversations taking place while His Majesty was handling personal business. History is strange like that. Empires rise and fall, treaties are signed, and occasionally somebody becomes wealthy because they happen to be standing nearby with a towel. Human civilization has always been wonderfully weird. Meanwhile, ordinary soldiers had fewer luxuries. In crowded castles, communal latrines were common. Rows of seats might line a room, with little concern for privacy. Modern people tend to find this horrifying, but privacy itself is somewhat cultural. Our ancestors viewed many things differently. Besides, when winter temperatures dropped and stone buildings became freezing cold, companionship may have been preferable to sitting alone in a drafty tower, wondering why life had brought you to this particular moment. Castle life wasn't always glamorous. Actually, it was rarely glamorous. Those beautiful stone walls looked impressive from a distance. Inside they could be damp, dark, cold, and occasionally home to smells that no amount of royal dignity could overcome. Let's drift over to another unpleasant reality. Cleaning, because somebody had to deal with the aftermath. Unfortunately, medieval history is rather quiet regarding the names of these workers, which feels unfair. Kings receive biographies, generals receive statues. Meanwhile, the unfortunate souls climbing into cesspits are largely forgotten. Their profession was known by various names. One common term was gong farmer, which somehow sounds agricultural, but no crops were involved. Quite the opposite. These workers cleaned cesspits, usually at night, because even medieval society recognized that certain jobs were best performed after everyone else had gone to bed. Gong farmers faced dreadful conditions, yet the work paid relatively well. Apparently, there are few labor shortages when the task involves descending into mountains of accumulated misery. Funny how that works. And castles accumulated plenty, because hundreds of residents produced enormous quantities of waste. Day after day, year after year, which meant pits eventually filled. Gravity, sadly, has limits, and eventually somebody had to intervene. Not exactly the stuff of heroic songs. No bard ever stood before a noble audience and sang, "Behold Sir Geoffrey, cleaner of pits, bravest among men." Probably because Sir Geoffrey himself would have preferred literally any other nickname. Still, societies depend upon invisible workers. They always have. and medieval castles were no exception. As strange as it sounds, entire systems developed around sanitation. Some castles incorporated flowing water nearby. Streams helped carry waste away. Others used deep shafts and carefully positioned drains. Architects experimented constantly, because unpleasant odors have a remarkable ability to inspire innovation. Nothing motivates engineers quite like desperation. And while conditions might seem primitive to us, medieval people considered many of these solutions remarkably advanced. Compared to throwing everything into the street, a dedicated garderobe was practically luxury, which tells you quite a bit about expectations during the Middle Ages. Still, one problem remained: winter, because stone toilets attached to exterior walls became incredibly cold, spectacularly cold, the kind of cold that makes a person question every decision leading up to that moment. Imagine leaving a warm fire, walking through dark corridors, sitting on freezing stone, and realizing that being a medieval duke wasn't quite as romantic as poets claimed. Titles were nice, castles were impressive, but none of that protected anyone from icy toilet seats. Equal suffering has a way of bringing humanity together. Even kings had limits, and somewhere across Europe, countless nobles probably sat in miserable silence, wondering whether becoming royalty had truly been worth all the trouble. As we'll discover, some rulers had far stranger bathroom arrangements than others, because medieval history, in its endless creativity, somehow managed to make even toilets political. And naturally, that led to arguments, because humans will argue about absolutely anything, including where to put a hole in a wall. Anyway, guys, that's where we'll leave our story for tonight. If you enjoyed this sleepy little trip into the strange realities of medieval life, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more relaxing history stories. I truly appreciate you spending your evening here with me. And wherever you are in the world, I hope you have a peaceful night, pleasant dreams, and I'll see you again very soon. Good night.